And it's thinking. Hey, we're live.
All right, well, thank you everyone for having me, and excited to be here tonight talking about the ability to utilize one code base for developing for Windows, web, mobile, as well as Mac, utilizing .NET MAUI Blazor as well as traditional Blazor development. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mitchel. I run a software company here in Iowa. My contact information is up here. I share my contact information solely for the purpose of, if you have questions, get my attention here. Now, if you're on the live stream, you need to get into the actual meetup. But otherwise, for those of you that are in the Teams meeting, get your questions into chat, come off of mute, and ask them. Um, this kind of conversation is most beneficial when we are able to, actually review things and understand things where they are. But you may have questions specific to your situation or otherwise where you just may want to ask me individually. By all means, please do reach out. All things .NET MAUI, mobile, etc. is what I do, and being able to share with everyone all of the things that we want to do is absolutely part of what I do. So please do, um, reach out if needed. And really for tonight, the idea with this talk was to really talk through the development scenarios for those that are looking to be truly cross-platform with their development and look at the different tools and techniques that we have available. .NET MAUI Blazor Hybrid is a newer opportunity for being able to actually go out and do something truly cross platform. And so really try to spread awareness of what this is, but focus on the true business application process where you can understand exactly why this might be beneficial, talk through a few of the things around how things might work one way or another to be able to work well, talk through the tooling, talk through some of the alternatives, and then really diving into a bit of code sample here so you can kind of see what a application may look like that is utilizing things, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps, how you get started with your own application. And everything from tonight, including the slides as well as the demo application, are available for you on GitHub. I'll share a link here at the end with everybody to be able to get in and take a look at it. So I always like to start out with, why might we want to do this? One of the things that we get from folks is, how should I build my application? Do I build something where my mobile application is everything? Do I build something where my desktop application is everything? Or do I build it where the web is everything? And sometimes the concept of an application being mobile only or an application being desktop only just isn't enough to meet those business needs. It doesn't accomplish what folks are looking for. And one of the things that we see with this a lot of times is that their desire now is becoming seamless interface, seamless experience, where the real goal from many businesses is the uh, desire to be able to have the same application experience across all of the devices. If I go and utilize an application on my phone, I should have a similar behavior to my desktop. I don't want to be restricted from doing things because I'm accessing things from a particular device. Obviously, there's an expectation that we need to be adaptive and provide things in a way that is usable across those different device types. But I should be able to do all of the actual physical things that I'm desiring to do. And so one of the things that happens a lot of times is, well, I don't want to build it for the web and then build it for mobile. I don't want to build it for my desktop app and then have to build it for the web. And so the idea here is, we're trying to create something where we can build a web interface in addition to mobile and desktop that requires minimal extra effort. We're also looking for ways that we can be able to build, test, and package the entire solution at once. We want to be able to build for all of the platforms, build for everything that we need to do, but do so in a manner that does not require us to step outside of the bounds and do something different. I want to be able to have a build solution that gives me all of my installers all at once. I don't want to have to wait for anything else. And so that's really the primary target that we're trying to get to. And the key that we always get, or the pushback, is, well, if you need the web, why don't you just build it responsive mobile, or why don't you do a progressive web app and those kinds of things? A lot of times it comes down to access to features, access to functionality. We may want to be able to actually read from the device and do things that we need those APIs for, but we still want to provide that continuity of functionality. And so one of the things here is we're really trying to be able to get the best of all worlds, if we can, from an architecture perspective. Related to all of this with .NET MAUI Blazor, I'm talking about the concept of going one step beyond what the standard Microsoft examples are, right? The standard Microsoft examples are talking about .NET MAUI Blazor as it relates to mobile and desktop only. They're not really pushing yet documentation into the website of things with this paradigm. So don't take this as something that you have to do. If you don't want that web interface, you don't have to. But if you're a web developer and you know how to build responsive applications for the web, and you know how all of those concepts go, .NET MAUI Blazor provides you a much more robust way to build your applications that's going to allow you to release faster, spend less time developing, and move forward. And that's what we'll kind of talk about tonight with all of the layout and infrastructure. You know, many of you, if you've done any mobile development in the past, not a great way for us to do polls or anything here within Teams, but the idea is, if you've worked with mobile before, you think, oh gosh, I got to go and learn XAML, and I have to make sure I know how to do styles, and how do I do responsive? How do I deal with going from tablet? For those of us with web development backgrounds, it's a daunting process to get to that point. And MAUI Blazor introduces a way for us to really take a step forward from there. Now, I'm not going to talk heavily today in this example about how to build your APIs, how to build your backend logic, how to do authentication. I have some other examples out there. I have other sample repos that are, out in my GitHub and everything else. They'll point you down those directions, but I'm really talking at the highest level today from a functionality perspective. How do you architect your solution? How do you share code? How do you get yourself ready for this kind of environment? Really briefly, though, I want to talk about the mobile development paradigms and tools that we have so that we can understand where MAUI Xamarin comes into play, or MAUI Blazor comes into play. So those of us that have been around, right, the .NET technology for mobile development had been Xamarin. At this point, essentially, it's legacy iOS and Android using a XAML-based UI. The most important thing, if you are a Xamarin developer and you don't know this, I strongly recommend you looking into it. But May 1st, 2024, the Xamarin product is no longer in support from Microsoft. In the mobile space, right, that's a real solid sign that we got to go somewhere. Where you go from there is where you start to have some options. We have traditional .NET MAUI. So traditional .NET MAUI, it's XAML based from a UI perspective. There is a migration path from Xamarin Forms to .NET MAUI, and it can be done fairly easily. There's a lot of things that you can do to make your life a little bit better. You have the ability to target Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and Tizen applications with .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI Blazor is the same general target set from a functionality perspective. .NET MAUI Blazor, at the base of what is provided in the tooling by Microsoft as it is right now, simply changes your UI infrastructure from being a XAML-based UI to a HTML-based UI. Now, inside of there, you can use whatever you want from a HTML perspective and how you go about doing things. So my example that I'm showing here tonight has a Bootstrap-based UI. In it, you can use any other tools of your own as you desire. I would not be doing things justice if I did not at least mention that there is one other platform out here. Uno platform is a XAML-based platform that does natively support Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Tizen, WASM, and Linux. So what you get with Uno platform is a little bit of built-in WASM support, where I'm going to show you how to do WASM, WebAssembly, for .NET MAUI Blazor. Uno platform does have some built-in support to get there directly. So just important to understand the playing field and what other things are out there. So how do we talk about MAUI Blazor? What exactly are we talking about when we are saying that we're going to use HTML to build a mobile app? How are we going to make that happen? The best way that I can think about explaining it is to talk about MAUI Blazor as it is essentially a web application that runs on a mobile device. Now, it's important to realize that that's an overly broad generalization. You are utilizing web-based technologies and styles to be able to create a user interface that is going to be reusable and work within your environment. It's not, it's not actually, it doesn't have the many limitations as a real web app does. You can get access to the camera. You can use NFC. You can do lock screen stuff. You can do everything that you need to do because you're on device. You're just doing a web-based interface. The idea here is that it makes your speed to development easier if you are a development team that has web-based experience. If you look at the Microsoft documentation and you look at who's the target audience, it's those of us that have been building for the web, but we need to do things on mobile or desktop. Now, it's important to realize here, one of the most common questions I get from conference talks is, but I'm a XAML developer. Fine, continue doing what you're doing. They are complementary technologies. If you really look at, I think, where Microsoft seems to be taking the roadmap. XAML is getting a lot of development to continue doing all of the things that are truly native. MAUI Blazor is getting a lot of enhancements as well to continue that experience. And the idea here is give developers the tools that they're most comfortable with. Developers will be productive and they'll be able to move forward quickly while leveraging the tools that they want us to be using, which is the Microsoft stuff. Okay, so when we come to things, what does it look like? How do we see this from an application perspective? And so really, the way that you look at your application, it's going to have a slightly more web feel because you're using web-based styles to do your layouts and interfaces. But it's completely mobile responsive. So this is a screenshot from the application running on Windows. I can see here that I've got enough screen real estate. So I have a sidebar menu. I have a login screen with some information here. You can see here when I go to a more mobile size, so I just resized the window from the Windows application, the menu moves up into a toggleable menu. Everything else kind of shrinks down, fits, and does everything you want. So you get the responsive web behavior as well as you get a good overall user experience. Now, one of the things that's important for folks to realize, what's a limitation, if you will, between a MAUI Blazor application and a .NET MAUI application, and that is they're going to look exactly the same regardless of the device that you're running on. So if I'm running my application on an Android device, my buttons are going to look how I want them to look. If I'm running on an iOS device, they're going to look the way that I want them to look. If I'm on a Windows device, they're going to look the way that I want. If you're leveraging traditional .NET MAUI using a XAML-based UI layout, and you're using button styles, date pickers, and those kinds of things, you're going to get the device-specific variations of those controls. So it's important to realize this really from a business expectations perspective, because ultimately what happens is as a MAUI Blazor application gets built, you get amazing brand consistency across your entire implementation. For some, though, that creates something that's an unintended effect, because when you're on Android, you're not going to have the back button placement and navigational elements inside of your application that absolutely match what all other Android apps have. But you're going to have absolute control. Your app is going to look the way you want it to look. So one thing just to be aware of is that slight difference there as you get from a user experience perspective, a little bit of a different bit along the way. So now continuing on, one of the things that is important to understand is that MAUI Blazor requires the use of Microsoft Edge WebView 2. This sets a couple of minimum versions that are worth noting. Now, I don't believe for most folks at this point that any of these items are really an issue. Android, you need to be on Android 7.0, which is API level 24 or newer. iOS, you need to be on 14 plus. I leave that noted as a possible concern just because there are some iOS devices that can't always get upgraded. But it's absolutely imperative. Your app will not install, will not run on anything less than iOS 14. And then Mac OS 11 or higher using Mac Catalyst. So minimum requirements are a little bit higher just to be able to meet those requirements. But it's something really, most individuals aren't going to run into any issues with compatibility or support. A few other things that always come up when we talk about how these applications work. I mentioned that it is not exactly going to look the same, right? Like with an Android app is going to maybe look the way you want it to look and not exactly how they want everything to look, those kinds of things. So there's no concerns with publishing to the stores. For those of us that have done App Store publishing in the past, a lot of times we've seen the design standards or the performance standards and those kinds of things. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing against the rules. There's nothing that's going to get you rejected. However, it is really, really important to not mention in your submission that you're using a web technology to build your application. And the reason I mention this is the reviewers of applications as they're submitted don't understand all of the underlying technologies, especially if you're using something like Apache Cordova or .NET MAUI Blazor or something like that to build your applications. There are very specific things in the terms of use of both the Android store as well as the iOS store that says you cannot just develop an app that's an iframe to something that you can get access to. And so I have seen multiple individuals that have disclosed too much information in their submissions, in their testing scenarios, to say, oh, well, it's a web-based front end. No, 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 don't tell them that. They don't need to know that. What they need to know is what's your application do, how do they test it, get them through the App Store. Thankfully, every time that we have had an issue, we've been able to tweak that verbiage, resubmit it. We've even used the excuse of, hey, yeah, this is the new guy that submitted that. Sorry about that. Let's correct that verbiage a little bit. But something to be aware of, just because it is something that I get asked all the time. Well, can I get it pushed through the App Store? We have multiple apps in the App Store that are MAUI Blazor. Haven't had a single issue with them as long as you don't over disclose. Continuing on, one of the other things that is worth noting right now, because we're running inside of the context of a WebView 2, recent Windows 11 releases have made it so that if you are in a web browser and you are trying to select files via a file chooser, and you're choosing files from an external device. So let's just say it's a connected iPhone, digital camera, external hard drive, those kinds of things. There's a limitation being placed in Windows right now that says you can only select one file at a time. It's an interesting tidbit, and I mention it solely because we always have to be aware, what are we? In MAUI Blazor, we're running inside of a web view 2. For the purposes of what Windows sees, we are a web app. We are a web browser, and that's how Windows sees us. So we will have some of those container limitations that are worth taking a look at. Now, Microsoft made some changes. I think this will get better in a service pack release for Windows 11. I just don't know a specific date, and it's kind of a unique point to at least talk about to make sure that everybody understands where we're going. In addition to this, you know, the developer support and everything here is really, really moving quickly. Now, as you're going to see tonight, it looks like my Visual Studio may or may not allow me to run in debug mode tonight, so we'll have to see what happens. Developer tooling and advancement is very, very quick. There's at least at minimum monthly releases. It is worth staying on the latest and greatest. There are a number of things that you have to install with the workloads. It's all done automatically for you when you create your new projects. But be aware and prepared for the release cycles. We are, you know, coming up ever so closely to the .NET 8 release. That's going to also really impact things. There'll be another big round of changes. So if you get to a point where something doesn't work or a big changes happen, that's most likely what happened. And sometimes, you know, updating Visual Studio is one of the things that you just, you know, want to be really, really careful with. And the .NET 8 launch, for those that aren't aware, right, that is scheduled for next week. So just be ready. Just be ready for it. What's really nice is performance has been improving with every single release. Build time performance, runtime performance, user experience. So what I want to talk about tonight is the architecture shift necessary with .NET MAUI Blazor to be able to achieve the concept of a Windows app, web app, and mobile app with the same code base. So if we look at the way that you would traditionally build a .NET MAUI app or a .NET MAUI Blazor app where you are targeting mobile, you could do everything inside of a single project. The one big thing with .NET MAUI over the prior Xamarin versions is there's the concept of one project. You can do everything in one project, and life is easy. In our case, we need to have one project, .NET MAUI Blazor, to be able to handle the user interface for Windows and mobile. We need to have a second ASP.NET Core Blazor project to be able to handle the UI aspects for the web application. And so the idea here is that we introduce a Razor class library that becomes a foundational piece of all of your user interface elements. And then we simply reuse those components in our respective applications. So the idea is really going to be to move the code and get the highest level pieces into that components project. Your view models, your views, as much of the logic and everything that you can get for those interactions in the components needs to live in this components project. That's the new thing that we're going to introduce. The routing and page setup, how you actually go from page to page, is going to be in the individual UI projects because there's slight differences between how you navigate through things from a .NET MAUI perspective versus a ASP.NET Blazor perspective. So my demo solution that I have out here is on my GitHub. I will drop this link into the chat as well for folks, just so that everybody is able to access it. And in this demo is a complete setup. I utilize the default examples and everything from Microsoft and modified them to support this one code base to kind of rule everything perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop that share here and bring into a Visual Studio share here and show you what we're able to do and kind of how the application is structured. I have been secretly yelling at Visual Studio while we've been going on here, trying to get things to work. I'm getting a, so this is one of the things that can happen when releases end up occurring and you're between times. I'm getting a situation where there's a build component that's necessary, and it looks like I've got a .NET 8 upgrade that's conflicting with things, and it's all because Visual Studio updated just prior to me getting ready tonight. So it looks like I may not be able to actually hit F5 and step through the code here. So I do apologize for all of you that aren't going to be able to see it, but you should be able to do a get latest on the repository and bring it down and be able to see things. I'll see if I can possibly get the web one here to work. We'll see if it, I don't know if it's going to let me do it because of the build dependency issue here. But give me 1 second here to see if this will start. Okay, perfect. It actually will start. So I am going to change my share. Let's just see what the application looks like from a web perspective. So this is the web version of the application. You can see here that we have a main window here. We have a counter. In this counter, we have the ability to click as many times and it updates. We come back here, go back. It's reloaded. So it's navigating like a web page. This is some weather forecast information. If I resize my window, you'll see that I have the standard responsive web behaviors and mannerisms. I can adjust as necessary. I can come back to my counter page. Everything's working as you would expect. So if I go look at the application here for the WebAssembly project, for the Blazor project, you'll see that I have a single Razor page, counter.razor, and in here I am bringing in I have a reference to my external applications. This got added automatically by ReSharper. But you see here I have my demo application components, demo counter component. So yes, this is boilerplate code. I need this code to exist in this project so that my WASM project is aware of what I need to do. And so for my WASM project, I'm able to simply say, okay, here's my component. If I then go into my shared component and go to my demos and go look at my counter component, you can see in here I have a H1 with my counter, and for my header, I've got a paragraph here with the current count. I have a button with an on click that calls increment count. And then you can see in here the code block for this. We have a current count that's set to 0. I have an event callback parameter that is on increment callback. So I can raise up an event and let the upstream stuff know that, hey, I did something and here's the new information. And then I have my method here. One of the things that's really nice to note for those of you that are newer to Blazor behaviors in general is I can increment my count here. This event callback, right? This technically could be null, but it's completely safe to await that item because of the way that everything gets initialized in the process here. So you can see here the increment count, I simply update it and we are good to go. And so that allows me to be able to limit what I have here. The only bits of custom pieces come in on this side. So then up here, which is my .NET MAUI application, I am able to have a counter that looks almost exactly the same. The only difference is, as I showed here, I can wire up the on increment callback, and then I could do something if I wanted to with that new value. So we can use these components to be able to pass information in and out. We could use them to, do things like, hey, you need to navigate here, you need to do something like that, or update other components. And now I've got two different applications that are leveraging the same pieces of code. Now, the way that this works from a user perspective is really pretty easy. We have the ability within Visual Studio to determine how we run it. So I'm on my MAUI project and I can choose, hey, I want to run this on a Windows machine. We'll see if it'll compile. I hope it will. I might get lucky. Look at that. Visual Studio did something good for once today. So here is the Windows version of this same application. Maybe. There it is. Everybody will be able to see this. There we go. So here's the Windows version. You can see here, right? There's no tricks. I'm inside of, this is a Windows application itself. You see here that I have some of the developer tools turned on, so I can, I can do things like inspect element and do all of the F12 developer tools to look at my layout. But here's my counter working just like it did with the other one, my data component with information. And you'll see I have the same responsive behavior from a Windows application. But then I have all of the native Windows features. I can minimize it. I can maximize it. I can bring it back. So now we're running inside of that web context with the same behaviors. The only difference we have is the setup on how we launch into the individual application. And that's where we get that developer productivity power, especially for those of us that are trying to target all of these different audiences. If you go into Visual Studio and say, okay, you know what, that Windows machine, that was great. I can now click the drop down here and say, you know what, I want to go to my Android emulator and I want to go to my Pixel 5 emulator that's running API version 33. I can go ahead and run this one in debug. Looks like it's going to work, so we should be good here. I'm going to change my share again. So now we'll see that my Android emulator is going to be starting. Hopefully, we'll deploy here. All right, let's see if I still have it on here. I don't know that I do. All right. So my emulator is, that's the one that is dealing from a .NET MAUI workload perspective here. So I apologize. I don't know if I can get this other one to work. But the idea here is that you're able to bounce back and forth between all of those different project types. You as a developer, you're able to determine what you want to look at, how you want to go through and do your debugging. And so the only real difference that we're doing from Microsoft documentation is your core logic goes into this components section. So a more advanced example is this fetch data component. So that one actually has, if we don't have any forecasts, we show loading, otherwise we show a table. And then, we have the ability to do injection. So we've injected a forecast service. This could be making an external data call, whatever it needs to be doing. And then we do what we need to do. On initialized, we go and grab the most recent information as of now, bring those, update the forecast, that updates the UI. This same code runs across everything else. So the idea here is to really promote reusability and get things to a point where you're able to go back and forth across everything. Any questions? I know it's a really high-level overview. The examples are out there, so you can pull them down. Visual Studio 2022, .NET 7 should be your only requirements to pull down the workloads and be able to take a look at things. I know that for my team, we've saved incredible amounts of time with developer productivity utilizing this architecture process by being able to use the tool sets that we're used to. But I'll open up now for any questions that folks may have. A little harder on the web-based way to get questions sometimes, so makes things go a little bit faster as well on my side. All right, no questions. Well, I really do hope that everybody, if you're looking for something new, taking a look at these projects. I got the link out there. Yeah. Go ahead. What can we do for you?
Have you done anything with doing normal web and going to like an Android and pulling off like the GPS and the camera from your Android device and then be able to probe like a camera and mic off your web device as well? Your PC device?
Yeah, so especially when you're talking about all of the different devices, you have access to all of the individual device information, GPS, accelerometer, all of the sensors. And basically what happens is you have APIs that you can call, and those APIs, if the device doesn't exist, you are able to basically it comes up as a null reference or an uninstalled device. So there's an entire selection here of sensor information. So anything that you can do with .NET MAUI, you can do inside of a .NET MAUI Blazor application. And that's, I think, the real power. So if you look here, for example, this is the device sensor processes for everything .NET MAUI. I can try to zoom in here just a little bit. So if you look, for example, oh, I want to get the accelerometer and I want to be able to look at, I want to be able to listen to the accelerometer and those kinds of things. You have APIs that are exposed. For example, accelerometer default is supported. That gives you that thumbs up, thumbs down that the device has an accelerometer that you can get to. And so behind the scenes, it's doing what it needs to do on Android. It's doing what it needs to do on all of the different platforms. You have a similar behavior for a barometer for things. And so basically, and sometimes you need to do, certain things. For example, so like a barometer, there's certain properties that aren't available to you on iOS or, certain other things. So like here's the compass that allows you to get the information here, and you can use start and stop methods. So each of these areas where you're going to, go after something from a device, you're able to do that. Geolocation is one of the other big ones. So one of the biggest things is that you do have to sometimes set things up. So to use geolocation functionality, you need to do some platform specific configuration. So you have to basically tell, Android that, hey, I'm going to use my GPS. On iOS, you have to tell it why you're using the GPS. And then on Windows, you don't have to do anything. And then basically from there, then you have individual items here. So you can get the last known location and kind of make all of those determinations from there. And those are going to work for you cross-platform across all the devices. And those are all APIs that are implemented out here as part of the .NET MAUI implementation, ready and available to you. You even use it for battery information, which I thought was the kind of fun one, is you can actually use the battery APIs to check battery level across Android, iOS, and like a Windows laptop using the same APIs, which is pretty cool. when you look at kind of some of the different things that you're looking to do, and be able to understand what the various status levels are within your individual devices.
Next question. Visual Studio is going away in the next version for the Mac. Are we strictly stuck? Is this going to be? I don't really like Visual Studio Code. Are we really stuck doing this on the PC for if we need to do stuff remotely on the Mac?
You know, that is one that is still a little bit. I mean, as of right now, my understanding is yes, Microsoft's tool recommendation on the Mac is VS Code. I will be perfectly honest. From my perspective, most of what I'm doing is I'm either remotely connecting to my Mac emulator from my Windows device and just running everything from my Windows PC. My Mac sits in a corner and, you know, it just does the Mac things it needs to do. But in a lot of cases as well, we typically are finding that some of the dev teams are using emulators to test, you know, Windows and Android, and then we're seeing more people pushing builds to test flight. So I can build in GitHub Actions on a Mac, push it to test flight, and then I just use test flight to let my QA testers test directly on device. That obviously doesn't work from a developer debugging perspective. You're still going to need to do the remote device connection stuff. But I anticipate that we'll see more information from Microsoft in the coming months, probably, based on that announcement of the end of support of Visual Studio for Mac.
Thank you.
So before we get to Court's question, I did want to make a pitch for one of the tools of one of our sponsors. If you're working on a Mac and you're going to lose your Visual Studio support, I don't know how well this works for the the MAUI development, but the Rider IDE is cross-platform and really is a fantastic IDE as well. So.
I was actually just getting ready to go there. I am not a Rider fan. I will be the first one. I can't survive without ReSharper, but Rider I've never been able to get on board with, but I have heard of developers having good success with it.
Yeah.
I just don't know how well its tooling works for emulator launching.
Yeah, I don't
should
either.
probably look into that actually.
Yeah, and I've worked in not currently, but over my career, I've worked in groups where there's a lot of switching back and forth between Java and .NET, and so, you know, being familiar with the JetBrains IDEs has been an advantage for me, but I certainly recognize that it isn't for everybody. So, but that's one of the tools. So now I know, and yes, Aaron put in the chat, aren't Rider and ReSharper both made by the same company? They are both JetBrains products. But I did see that there was a question from Court. Are you able to see that question, Mitchell?
Yep, I saw
Okay.
it. So Court, just make sure I understand this question. So you're asking if the glass wall between the browser and client is still there, desktop or browser. Does it mean security is more questionable? The best way that I can explain, I think, and if I understand the question, right, you're talking about the fact that a traditional web app is never able to access the file system. You can't browse.
That's right. That's right. That's what I'm asking.
Yep. So that's where this is, I think, the hardest conceptual thing for developers. Yeah, if anybody else has other question and answer, feel free to put them in there so we can get to them. That boundary, Court, I think, is the hardest thing for developers to understand, because it's unnatural from a web perspective to be able to interact with the browser in that regard.
Yeah, it's
or
like
with the
mind-blowing,
machine.
actually.
Well, the one that's really mind-blowing is, let me pull this up here real quick. Just because one of the things, a great example. So we have one of the applications that I'm working on with my team. We are doing large file downloads. So think of it this way: you're inside of an app, the app's doing something, and eventually you need to download and save a 15 gigabyte file to the machine that it's running on. It might be a phone, it might be a Windows machine, it might be, something else. And so we're inside of the web context, right? My team was like just racking their brains. We couldn't figure out where to go or what to do. And there is a add-on ability with the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit that provides you a couple of extra little developer tools that illustrate some of the magic that you can really do because of the way that this works. And so my favorite one right now is the file saver. So with the file saver, it provides you the ability to select a target folder and save a file. This is just like in a Windows app where you can do a file picker. You can do the same thing here. So in this example, you can see here, oh, I've got an image. I want to save it as temp PNG to the desktop. Notice that this is a Mac. You can do it, you have some permission setups that you have to do on the Android side of things because you're wanting to write. But see here, read and write external storage. That's all you have to do is say, hey, I want to do that. And so what's amazing is this is all you have to do inside of your C# code. Now, for those of us that are web developers, right, the concept that I can simply say, hey, save this with this file name and here's my bytes, that's crazy talk, right? So that boundary is really hard. And the thing to think about is, yes, we're running the web, but really I'm not running the web in a browser as in Chrome or Edge or Safari. I'm running the web in the context of an application. So that's how we have that ability to get access to everything. Now, when you go in and do something with the true hybrid with MAUI Blazor, and like I'm showing here where you're reusing it across in a WebAssembly context, that's the one place, right, where it's not going to completely work. We had to play around a bit to get this file saver to work on the WASM side. So that's why if I look at like, why does Microsoft not have WASM support built in to the core MAUI Blazor hybrid? I think that's why. So that context, the security boundary is still there. It's just you can bend those rules a little bit. And I think it's the absolute hardest thing for developers to understand, especially things like I want to do a pop-up, like it becomes really easy to do some of these things. But yeah, the essentials bits. The other fun one is a folder picker. Being able to just pick a folder on anything, and then you can actually read devices. This is one of those things that is very uncommon for people to get their head wrapped around. So just something to think about there. So then a couple questions here as well. So does it run natively on the mobile device? Yes, it is running natively on the mobile device. It's going through the same kind of compilation process and everything else that a Xamarin app would do or a .NET MAUI app would do. And then it just uses the web view inside of there. So you are native. You're going to pass all of the store review processes, performance markers. One thing that's really interesting is I compare application startup time on device of my Xamarin Forms 5 projects compared to the same app now done as .NET MAUI Blazor, and my startup time is something like 10% of what it used to be. So not only does it run native, it's lightweight overall, and startup time is really good. Let's see here. So with React Native for web, are there certain types of apps or use cases where this would be much better than you can think of? You know, really, you know, React is, I am not comfortable enough with React to be able to give you a solid answer on that tooling. I know there are people that swear by React Native. I personally, the way that React works, the way that, oh my gosh, I'm drawing the blank on the name of the, like Apache Cordova, and then you have the, one of the other, you know, the web-based ways to build mobile. I'm not as big of a fan of those, but I know that, and it's mostly because I've been burned by some poor decisions that probably shouldn't tank my opinion of the product. But I can't answer that one enough, and I'll try to dig up a little bit more on how that works. And then the secondary question here is, if we separate our components into another project, where does the logic for native functionality reside inside the solution? So that is a great question. So when you create the library, the component library, you have the ability to do the same thing in your component library that you do in the actual application UI. So the single project architecture of .NET MAUI really allows you to basically, anything that is platform specific, if it's just truly a different implementation on each platform, you can put it inside of a platforms folder, and then you just break it out by the individual platforms. So for example, my Android main activity, which is, you know, the starting thing that it needs, goes in here. When I build this for iOS, this file doesn't exist. If I have my iOS main entry point here of my program.cs is here, and you'll see here that my app XAML for starting in Windows is right here. So if you have something like that, great, easy peasy. You also can use compiler directives if you need to be able to do something, you know, straight inside of your code. I don't think I have any examples in here, but you can actually, you know, you can do a compiler directive, you know, if Windows do this, if iOS do this, if Android do this. So you have the ability to kind of move things around, but you can absolutely have platform folders inside of this component, and the same compilation support will happen along the way. All right, well, I really appreciate it. Any other questions? You know, again, it's designed to be a high-level overview here for folks to be able to get you started, give you maybe a look at a different way of doing things. Not saying this is the right thing all of the time, but for some, it's a way to be able to develop for devices substantially faster, even if you don't utilize the concept of, you know, a web project separation. So, all right, well, thank you guys very much. I can hand it back over to the organizers here and let you guys take things on from here.
All right. Thanks, Mitchell. So I'm going to share my screen where we will continue the slideshow, and all right, I have some info. Presenter ratings and comments. This tiny url.com/SLC prize. That's where you want to go to enter feedback for Mitchell. But also, when you enter feedback, you're entered to win a prize. Prizes are, we have like 2 O'Reilly ebooks and 2 JetBrains licenses for like a single JetBrains product. We've got, we have a Slack channel. Last I heard, someone that's already in the channel would need to invite you. But if you're interested in being invited to that, put your email in here and one of us can invite you. We still could
So
use.
Steve, if you were trying to share your screen, you're not right now, just by the way.
Well, thank you. I thought I was. Do you see
Yep,
it
I
now?
see it now.
Thank you, Gary. So presenter ratings and comments, tinyurl.com/SLC prize. And that is put in the chat. If you want to get invited to Slack, put your email address in the Slack, in the Teams, and we can invite you. We also could use more people to help organize this meetup. If you want to be a .NET board member, you can apply. Here's the link, SLC Net Board app. And if you're interested in presenting, we have another URL, SLC Net. And this stuff can be found on our website, slcnet.tech. And we have this QR code. I don't even know what that's for, but I'm sure maybe it goes to slcnet.tech.
I'll shoot it with my camera and we'll see.
All right.
It's been a while, probably since anybody's done that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's a link to the prize from when we used to do that. Yep, it's a link to the prize. It's a link to the prize feedback link from back when we were meeting in person, I think.
Right.
When does the in-person meetings happen again?
When does the what happen again?
In-person meetings?
Good question.
And second part of that is, are we gonna get tech systems to do, or these recruiters to do what they used to do and bring pizza?
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the hope. So we've got the slide for thanking our sponsors. Some of the info is a little bit old here, but tonight, JetBrains and O'Reilly, when we're back in person, Health Equity, hopefully some of the recruiters, and Ecovia, where Gary works, we might meet there. All right. Gary, are you ready to take it away?
I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, and then I'll probably trim it.